Welcome to Basic Brewing Radio for Thursday, January 18th, 2007. I'm James Spencer. Here at Basic Brewing Radio, we're all about home brewing. But this week, we stick close to home, or at least close to my home, to talk to two aspiring professional brewers in Northwest Arkansas about gluten-free brewing. If you have celiac disease, you cannot tolerate gluten, which is a protein substance in most of the grains that are used in brewing traditional beer. So what do? Well, we'll hear from Connie Rieper-Estes and Leigh Nogy about their experiments in homebrewing gluten-free beer and their dream of founding a commercial gluten-free brewery. Well, this past week's show with John Palmer and PH generated a fair amount of response, all of it positive, that we, or rather John, would tackle such an advanced topic. Some listeners sent me questions about pH, which I immediately passed like a hot potato to John, because I'm yet to become an expert in water pH. Here's one of them. Chris from Yorktown, Virginia writes, in your water chemistry podcasts with John Palmer and Greg Noonan, I recall hearing that if your finished beer has a pH of greater than 4.0, you will end up with dull flavors. However, I tested a homebrew I bottled 1 week ago, a Michelob Ultra, and Chris says, yeah, I know, in parentheses, and a beer from a local craft brewer, St. George Brewing Company, and they all tested above 4.4. I'm using Precision Labs pH test strips that range from 2.8 to 4.4. Also, I've read somewhere on the internet, Chris says, that finished beer pH is typically between 4.0 and 4.5. Can you help me sort this out? And John Palmer responds, the numbers for beer pH I quoted were from Dr. Charlie Bamforth's review of pH in the ASBC. That range was 3.8 to 4.3, but that covers a lot of different beer styles, and I think it's safe to say that each style probably has an optimum range, which this average range does not exactly coincide with. And John continues, also I said, based on Bamforth, that beers with a pH above 4.4 would taste dull and soapy, and beers less than 3.7 could taste acrid and metallic. And Bamforth and the ASBC are typically talking about pale lagers. So again, the style factor may have a role to play here in determining what is the correct pH for a particular beer. So another case of your mileage may vary, essentially. So the optimum finished beer pH may vary depending on the style of the beer and the desired tastes that style dictates. I appreciate John still continuing the discussion with those of you who have written to me, or written to John via me, because, off they went to California once they hit here. And he says that he's gotten some feedback directly through his website as well. That's howtobrew.com. I also received more feedback on the home brewer versus craft brewer debate from north of the border. Apparently the question is stirring up a discussion in brewing circles up there in Canada. And here's part of it. Greg from Saskatoon, Saskatchewan writes, and it would just be fun to live in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, I think, just to say the name. The following is from Stephen Cavan, or is it Cavan, says Greg, from Paddockwood Brewing. Stephen was a professor at the University of Saskatchewan before he found his true calling. And here Greg is quoting Stephen, this is a hot topic in the microbrewing world. I tend to agree with Greg Noonan's position that craft brewing applies to commercial production on systems not much greater than 50-barrel size. Up to that size, the brewer is getting in there at a hands-on level, mixing the mash, smelling the hops, changing the brew as it is going, or crafting, quote-unquote, the product by hand. Larger systems really don't allow that kind of manipulation, and the bigger the system, the harder that is to do. And he continues, many places in the USA use total production capacity to do this too, and commonly say 1.5 million liters a year is the upper limit for a craft brewer title. I think this was the logic behind the federal excise change too. A 50-barrel system would be brewing 250 days a year or thereabouts. This is probably the logic behind the definitions of regional and micro. On my 10-barrel system, I could supply product across the region or nation, but I would never become a quote-unquote regional brewery or national brewery. I would have to brew something like 1,300 times in a year. And then Stephen concludes, I say the term home brewer is not used interchangeably with craft brewer here, in Canada, that is. I've only heard craft brewer being applied to commercial brewers. Home brewer covers both extract and all-grain brewers here. So there you go, more grist for the mill in the terminology discussion. I think it's interesting because you can tell a lot about someone by how they define themselves in language and terminology, I believe. It's fun to hear how it differs from one part of the world to another. Well, going way back to the episode of Basic Brewing Video where we added potassium sorbate to stop the fermentation of one of our batches of mead, Craig from Brew Bubba's wrote in to say, you talked about potassium sorbate killing the yeast. And he says, note this from The Complete Mead Maker by Ken Schramm. Potassium sorbate does not kill the yeast, but rather prevents the fermentation process from continuing. Well, I checked around, and Craig's right. Potassium sorbate doesn't kill the yeast. It stops the yeast from reproducing, and then the cells eventually die off from attrition. So the yeast does eventually die, but not as a direct result from the potassium sorbate. So there you go. Well, speaking of fellow podcasters, we have a celebrity endorsement of our 2007 Brewers Logbook this week from Rick Sellers of Pacific Brew News Radio. Rick was kind enough to send in an audio file, and I want to play that for you after our interview. I don't want to get too commercial, before the good stuff. I don't want to hold you hostage there too much. Now, we have sold more than half of our supply of Brewers Logbooks. We only ordered a limited quantity this year, and once they're gone until next year. This is just kind of an experiment this year to see how the books do, and they're doing well. So go to basicbrewing.com, click on the banner for the book, and you can see scans of pages from each section. If you click on the links within the text description of the product page, so in other words, you'll see section 1, and it'll be blue, and you click on that, and you'll see an image of what that section looks like. Incidentally, I've now racked my Belgian brunette beer into the secondary, and that's to try to get the stubborn Trappist yeast to flocculate out a bit. And when I racked it over, I made a little note on my logbook's calendar. So very handy. Okay, now to our story of a couple of homebrewers who are chasing the dream of opening their own brewery. Connie Rieper-Estes and Leigh Nogy are the co-founders of Dark Hills Brewery, a gluten-free brewery that is still on paper. However, they do have their beers formulated, and they do have persistence on their side. They took a few minutes to educate me on gluten-free brewing at the site of their brewery in Springdale, Arkansas. Well, Leigh and Connie, welcome to Basic Brewing Radio.
Thank you. Thank you for having us on here.
And we were discussing that, Leigh, you are the brewer, which it's refreshing to have a budding professional female brewer. It seems like all I talk to is guys nowadays.
Well, thank you. I'm happy to represent my half of the brewers out there, I guess.
And Connie, you are a business partner as well.
Yes, I like to help Leigh with the brewing also.
And you guys are going to do gluten-free brewing. Now, for those out there who have no idea what that is, kind of give us the spiel, give us the explanation that you're giving to people talking about this brewery.
Certainly. Gluten-free beer is simply beer made without barley, wheat, rye, or oats, which are cereals that contain gluten. And gluten is a huge allergen. And so we do our best to make a beer that tastes like real beer with other ingredients.
And Connie, you are intolerant to gluten, right? How does that affect you?
Right. Well, being intolerant to gluten, it was about 9 years ago when I found out, and it's really changed my life. I can't buy food the way I used to. Just without the wheat, the rye, the oats, and the barley, It's pretty difficult to find food without those ingredients. Everything in a bag, a box, or a can has them at least as a filler. So I've had to learn to read labels. I've had to decide what I really do want to eat, and eating out is also a difficulty, because even though we can avoid those ingredients, maybe a crumb of those ingredients will fall into the dish that's being prepared for me. I can't be certain that it's free from cross-contamination, the food that I would go out to eat at a restaurant. So it's a little difficult. I've been packing snacks lately.
So what would happen what are the symptoms if you were to eat, say, a piece of bread or something that we wouldn't think twice of eating a piece of bread, but what would happen if you were to do that?
Right. Well, for me, of course, all the symptoms are individual to each and every celiac. But for me, I would get the worst 9-hour stomach ache you've ever had. It's horrible. It knocks me out for at least 3 days.
Wow. So that's certainly a deterrent.
It's a huge deterrent. And you never know exactly when it will strike. You think you're doing fine, and then a little piece of cross-contamination comes in, and just 1 gram is enough to set up the complete set of symptoms. So it's kind of tricky.
So where did the idea come from to start up this operation, to start up this gluten-free operation?
Well, that came from me. When I found out I was celiac, or that I couldn't have gluten, I thought, okay, well, I just won't have beer. But after a few years of that, and I started really wanting beer. If you can't have something, that's the first thing you want. So I wanted to learn to make my own beer. And I thought that finding someone who makes gluten-free beer that could just show me how would be great. But I went online and found out that not many people knew how to make a gluten-free beer. So I tried to go back to the beginning. I found the Society for Creative Anachronisms. They're the people who dress up in medieval and recreate the medieval times. And since I could trace beer brewing back that far, I thought that would be a perfect place to start looking for a gluten-free beer recipe, kind of going back to the beginning. So I was in contact through online. I contacted the SCA, and they directed me to Leigh, who already had 2 gluten-free beer recipes. I was in heaven.
And how did that work out, Leigh?
Very well. We made some for her wedding reception, and the guests at the wedding were crying, literally. And I thought that was a bad reflection on our beer. However, it turned out that they were just really happy to have beer. I've never seen that before. So I knew it was something.
So there were other celiacs at the reception as well?
Right. Once you find out that you have celiac, then you personally can start spreading, not a diagnosis, of course, but you can tell people what it is. There is so little education here about celiac. Doctors don't know to look for it, so they can't diagnose it. So word of mouth right now is a good way to tell people about celiac. And, if you have symptoms similar to these, then you can go look it up online and, try and tell your doctor about it. Whether he knows or not is always a question.
So where do we get from home brewing to wanting to start this commercial endeavor?
Well, similarly, I had a friend who was celiac, and he wanted to be just like everybody else and have a beer occasionally, and he asked me to develop a couple of beers. And I was a home brewer and a medieval brewer. A couple of the oldest beers in the world are made with rice, and another one from other millet grains that are gluten-free. So I knew about those, and I had been making those for him when I met Connie. And once we met and I started teaching her how to home brew gluten-free beer, we decided that there are probably many more people out there who need this kind of beer. And that's when we started working more on various recipes to make similar craft-style beers. And that's where we ended up thinking, the world needs this. So that's how it all came about. And we've developed 6 gluten-free craft-style beers.
And these are beers that mimic traditional gluten-full beers? Or what's the opposite of gluten-free?
We just call those regular beers. But they are very similar to regular beers. We have a full variety. We have a light lager, which a lot of Americans enjoy, Budweiser, so why shouldn't a celiac? We have an India Pale Ale for those hopheads out there. We have an amber and a red and a stout. So, and forgot the lemon ale. That's more like a hard lemonade, and that's more of a malt beverage.
Which are also popular nowadays.
That's right.
So how long have you been in the planning stage, and where are you at this point?
Well, we've written at least 2 business plans. When you're trying to develop a company that needs a lot of funding, you have to revise and revise. And right now we are in a business plan that allows a 2-stage development of this brewery. And we'll start out at the pub level, which can have self-distribution. And we'll have tours and pizza on Saturdays. And then after a year and a half, we hope to expand to the larger size facility where we can distribute to several states and hopefully serve celiacs in a wide area.
And how many barrels are you going to be able to make at one time, and what's your projections on production?
Well, we're going to start out with a 50-barrel system that we will be producing probably 100 to 200 barrels per week, and that'll be 5,000 barrels per year, and expansion at the 3rd year will be up to about 25,000 barrels.
Wow, that's pretty ambitious. Connie, did you think that it would come to this?
Well, from beginning home brewing, I never would have thought. But I felt so guilty enjoying this great beer and reading online of all the celiacs who are craving beer and missing beer. I thought that this would just be a really good thing to do. I've been watching the different breweries make a gluten-free beer, like Bard's Tale and Ramaco Valley and Lakefront, and I noticed that every year they were doubling their sales and they were doubling their production. And after 3 years, I said, "Hey, Leigh, we have a really good beer here, and a lot of people would really like it. And it looks like this is something that people are really searching out. A lot of people will pay $60 to have it delivered from, to buy it online and have it delivered to them for a 6-pack. Or maybe 2. But it's ridiculous, the amount that you have to pay to get it delivered online, and people are still doing it, so they really need beer.
So there are more and more commercial breweries that are coming on board to this movement?
All right, Anheuser-Busch just released Red Bridge, which is a sorghum gluten-free beer. And we're really excited about that. It shows that this is a viable market. And since we have more of a craft beer than Anheuser-Busch might, we haven't had a chance to try it yet. It's so hard to get a gluten-free beer. But we hope to try it, and the beer that they'll make will probably go nationwide. It'll suit a large segment of the celiac population, but our beers being more of a craft beer will fill in the niches of the beer lovers out there who love a dark beer.
Now, on your label, prominently displayed is a band that says beer brewed from rice. Now, most of our audience, when you mention rice and beer, they turn up their nose because they think of rice being used as an adjunct in a barley beer. Is there a are there some perceptions that you are going to have to turn around when marketing this product?
Well, one of the problems with the labeling for a gluten-free beer is that currently the FDA is mandating that we cannot say that it's gluten-free. Now, the TTB, who regulates beer, is trying to get that passed. But in the meantime, we can call it beer. We can list what our main ingredients are, but we cannot say that it's gluten-free. So we're definitely going to have a bit of a challenge getting people to recognize what it is who aren't celiac. However, those who are celiac are already watching and waiting. And so we feel pretty confident that they will recognize our beer. As far as, rice being a deterrent, well, we've tried the various other grains that are possible to brew with, and we prefer rice because it's more of a grain that tastes like barley or wheat. Sorghum, we feel, even though we use some of it in our beer, if it's entirely out of sorghum, it has a very vegetable matter taste that we think is more unlike a grain. And that's why we really like rice as our base.
So maybe the celiacs will see beer brewed from rice and kind of see that as a code word for the catchphrase.
Green banner, because dark green is the color for celiac.
Well, there you go. See, I didn't know that. Secret code. You're using secret code. You're sneaking it through. So when do you expect to roll out your first batch? Is it still up in the air?
As soon as we collect $850,000.
Well, and there may be some people out there who are interested in knowing more about how to help you get off the ground, and we'll put a link to your website in the episode description of this episode on basicbrewingradio.com. So let's switch gears, and I wish you luck in your commercial endeavor, because I think it would be really cool to have another brewery in Arkansas, and especially up here, and you'll increase the amount of breweries in the state by a third by when you come into business. But let's switch gears to the homebrew side, because we are primarily about home brewing here on Basic Brewing Radio. So if someone were to want to brew a gluten-free beer, how do you change your mindset?
You have to think outside the box. I brought 3 websites that have really helped us. These are different websites, but they all have gluten-free home brewers helping home brewers. So one lists the gluten-free grains you could use, and one will list recipes for gluten-free beer, and another will list how to properly put these together. And it was really quite a lot of research, to put these sites together. And hopefully we'll be able to list them at some point.
Yeah, I can put some links to those too as well.
Really nice.
So do you do all grain brewing? I assume you would have to, because there probably aren't any gluten-free extracts out there. Does your mashing strategy change when you're mashing gluten-free grains instead of barley?
Well, actually, I think you've got it partially correct.
Which is par for me. Bring me up to speed, Leigh.
Sure. There are extracts out there that are gluten-free. There's rice extract and sorghum syrup, and also molasses syrup, which is known as treacle. All these can be combined in different amounts for the home brewer that is basically inexperienced. They can make an extract beer this way. and of course, use a variety of hops to their suiting and come up with a very decent tasting beer. They can bottle condition, and one of the most important things they would do is use a dry yeast, which is gluten-free. It's produced on molasses extract. However, I'd stay away from the White Labs yeast or White Labs, because those extracts are provided in liquid form and they are grown on barley extract. So for the basic home brewer, they can make a beer that way. However, in what we're doing, we've used the research of Martin Zarnkow. He's in Germany, and he has been very helpful to us in providing research on the different grains that are available and how they test as opposed to barley and wheat. And you can look at the results, say, of like their enzymes that they contain, the ability to convert starch to sugar. And if you're using a partial extract like rice for your sugar base, and you combine it with a combination of different grains that have enough of these enzymes to convert the starch to sugar, you can do an actual all-grain mash using the proper mash-in temperatures with these cerealized or malted grains, and actually, get the mouthfeel and the body, those very important things from these other grains that your basic extract brew would lack. So that's more of what we do to make really fine beers that are gluten-free. So the home brewer could start like we did with extracts and then work their way up to a really fine beer. But it takes a lot of experimentation.
So you're kind of making this up as you go along?
Yes, lots of experiments. I mean, 3 years of experimenting, maybe 1,000 beer recipes. We've had so many 1-gallon jugs of beer that's just a little bit different from the next.
So you're brewing in small batches?
We are. Currently, we're up to 16-gallon size, which that's a bit much to handle for a home brewer, but it really helps us produce a decent amount.
Yeah, we always say we're about the small batches, and especially in experimentation. Were you doing like 1-gallon batches of beer?
Yes, usually 1 gallon times 8, so that we could see the differences between each ingredient. Because when you're making gluten-free beer, you have to find an ingredient that will produce the right size carbonation bubbles, the right head retention. These things that normally barley provides, no, they're just not there. So you have to really think outside the box.
Well, you're making me thirsty. So let's pause for a second and pour some samples. Okay, what are we pouring here, Leigh?
This is Ayla's Amber, and it is kind of a dark golden ale. It has a combination of Fogel and Kent Golding hops, and it is, and it also has just a pinch of honey, which gives it a little bit of a zing and leaves people wondering, what's in that? But
that was my idea.
It certainly looks like a beer. Cheers, by the way.
Cheers, thank you. Cheers.
That's good.
It smells like beer.
Mm-hmm.
It has bubbles like beer. It's clear like beer. Is it beer?
It's beer. I think I can taste it. I almost wish you hadn't told me about the honey, because I think I can taste a little bit of the honey in there. But it's certainly, the mouthfeel is there. The aroma is good. This is good. Tell us about tell us about the as much as you can without giving away trade secrets. But remember, we've got homebrewers listening. Give us the background. What are the ingredients like, and how do you get something like this?
Okay. We use mostly rice, like I said, Arkansas-grown rice. And yay! We always try to check our sources to make sure that they're gluten-free, including at the farm to make sure that they're not rotating crops and like producing, say, wheat in the winter, as opposed to a summer crop. So that's important. We use sorghum and molasses, and one of the things we want to do is continue our research and use millet, buckwheat, quinoa. There's a lot of grains out there that can be used, but currently right now we've stuck with the basic grains that are easily available.
How did you come up with this formulation? I mean, just experimentation, or is rice the bulk of the grain bill? I mean, I don't want you to reveal any trade secrets, but can you give us an indication of percentages or?
I would say that it depends on our beer style. Of course, the stout has the heaviest grain bill, and we use a lot more of the darker varieties of rice. We use a lot more sorghum in that, and for this one, it's probably 70% rice. So,
wow, when rice is known to be used for lightening up the body of a beer, this, as I said, this beer has some fairly substantial mouthfeel, and it surprises me that it's that much rice. Where does the color come from?
I would say that. No, this is one of our secrets, I guess.
Okay, well.
We use a variety of grains, including rice from around the world.
Okay. Well, that's interesting. How would you describe that color? An amber, I guess you would describe it as an amber color because it's the name of the beer. Mm-hmm. Are there beers that are similarly colored that we can point people to? Maybe
Sam Adams?
Just the Boston Lager.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's delicious. I have heard bad things about gluten-free beer, to tell you the truth.
We have too, and we're really upset because you can make a really good tasting gluten-free beer. You can make it taste like beer. It just takes a lot of trial and error.
And this is a homebrew, and it's very good.
Thank you.
Have you entered these in any contests anywhere?
We have. Secretly, we haven't exposed that our beer is gluten-free in the contest. And we've received results like tastes great, looks great, everything's good except needs more malt. Oh. So I can't say that that's a bad result from a contest. I don't think we'll ever win, but we might win some gluten-free beer contests.
Yeah, the BJCP just needs to add another category, it sounds like.
But we didn't come in last.
That's right.
That was very encouraging for us, using non-beer ingredients.
One thing we've found in all of our taste tests is that Americans like a less malty beer, and they seem to appreciate this beer, even among normal beer drinkers. That's who we've been doing our taste tests on, and they're a hard crowd to please. But the maltiness is one thing that they don't seem to be all that concerned with. Maybe it's from years of Budweiser drinking.
I was going to say this audience may be skewed a little bit, but but there are styles other than the traditional, as they say, macro brews or the big beers that aren't as malty as others. So I don't think that would necessarily turn a craft beer lover off. Shall we move on to the next one? Sure. Okay, and we're on to the second now. And how would you describe this?
This is more like a hard lemonade. It is a cereal beverage, I would describe it as. It's got some ale-like tendencies. It's fruity. It's tangy, kind of a citrusy taste. But it also tastes like a beer.
It tastes a lot like my grandmother's lemonade that she used to make when I was a kid. I don't know. There's a note in there that just says grandma, and she was a teetotaler, so she probably wouldn't. But I don't know. It's not as overly tart as a lot of those, like the hard lemonade products or something like that. It's not overboard in that direction. Yet it does have the lemon flavor is definitely out front.
Well, one thing we wanted to do was have a beer that's drinkable by the neophyte drinker, the young crowd. And also, we found that the older group really likes this. Maybe people who, as they've gotten older, have lost their appreciation for beer, and like their taste buds change. Older people like a sweeter taste. So we've got a range of drinkers for this one.
And this it looks like lemonade. I mean, it's the color of lemonade. So I would imagine that is the malt bill similar to the other beer as far as the content of rice and the other grains? Or? Actually,
no. This one is mostly rice. Mm. So that's the base for this one. It's an alcopop.
and some of the hardcore craft beer lovers may turn their nose up at it, but there's definitely, from a commercial perspective, a market for it.
But their wives won't.
There's all this conversation in the on these beer shows of what's the beer to get your wife or girlfriend into drinking beer. And you're saying this, Connie, this may be a gateway beer for the...
wouldn't want to say that. Gateway beer.
for the adult females.
Right. Well, it's a nice, refreshing. It's not beer tasting. It doesn't have that yucky beer taste. So, but it's still a beer. You can order it as a beer and drink beer with everyone else, but you can enjoy your beer.
So this would... on the Zima products and things like that, do you have the same problem with them as you would normal beers?
They have barley malt, so they're on my no list.
I mean, you don't think of those as being beers, but they are malt beverages. The Smirnoff labeled products and such as that, they're all malt products.
Right, they are, and they have barley. They have a higher alcohol content, and that's what classifies them as a malt beverage instead of a beer?
Actually, I think it's just that they aren't enough of a barley malt, so they have a main other flavor. So that would be like this one.
Well, it's tasty as well. So we can list your site on our site, and we can also point to the other links that you pointed out to point people more in the direction of technically how to do this at home. But I've actually had email from people asking about this subject. I have a friend who is gluten intolerant. Do you know of any recipes? And I didn't know of a resource, so it's good that we've found these and we can put them out there as well. Any closing thoughts for homebrewers out there who are wanting to move in this direction? What did you find was the most important key in making a successful beer tasting beer?
Never give up.
From the technical aspect, I'd say that bottle conditioning always gave me problems as a home brewer. And when we developed our very first, we didn't develop it, but when we made our very first counter pressure filler, that really improved my home brew. We used a design by the Kirkendall Brewers Guild, and they have a website that shows the plan, and it really is nice. I wish someone would come up with a commercially available counter pressure filler that really works, because artificial carbonation compared to bottle conditioning is just so much better. I don't know if that's relevant to gluten-free beer, but it is relevant to home brewing.
Well, thank you both for your time, and good luck on your Dark Hills Brewery.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, thanks again to Connie Rieper-Estes and Leigh Nogy, and best of luck to them with their dream of opening their brewery. You can find out more at darkhillsbrewery.com, and I'll add more links to gluten-free information in the description of this episode on basicbrewingradio.com. Now on to our celebrity endorsement of our 2007 Brewer's Logbook from Rick Sellers of Pacific Brew News Radio.
Hey James, this is Rick at Pacific Brew News, and I want to say thank you very much for putting together this 2007 Brewer's Log. This is a phenomenal book. I love the 2-page calendars. It makes it really easy for me to read notes and also to read the calendar. I mean, I could really plan ahead, and I've tried to put a schedule together from now and through June. That's June 2007. But perhaps easily the best thing about this is the 2 pages of brewing notes, where I can put the name, the style, the ingredients, as well as the schedule, the entire schedule, and a whole page of fermentation and brewing note and tasting notes. I often try and keep tasting notes and fermentation notes together, but to be quite honest, I often use Post-it notes, and they end up everywhere. And I can see this is a great way to keep everything in one place, and it's very easy to read. A great book, and I hope to see more of this in the years to come.
Well, it's very kind of Rick to take the time to send in that file. I'm glad that he likes the book, and I hope those of you who have picked up the logbook from our store will like it too. And I'm looking forward to comments from you after you put it through its paces. And don't forget, we've got a limited quantity, so get yours before they're gone. If you have brewing questions, show suggestions, or just want to say howdy, write to james@basicbrewing.com, or just fill out the contact form on basicbrewing.com, and please don't forget to tell us where you're from. And please check the spelling of your email address on the form there so that I can respond back to you. And while you're on our site, you can check out our online shop, where you can find great pricing on our DVDs and a combo deal to save you even more. In our first DVD, Basic Brewing Introduction to Extract Home Brewing, we walk you through the extract brewing process step by step from boiling to bottling. And in Basic Brewing Stepping into All Grain, we take you through the all grain process from milling your grain to collecting your wort. And we show you how to do batch sparging and fly sparging and infusion mashing and step mashing, all in a nonlinear process that you can pick your way through. You can see a listing of the fine folks across the country who sell our DVDs on basicbrewing.com. And if there isn't a vendor in your area, you can order it straight from us online. I'll box it up myself. Also, don't forget the logbook. Subtle plugging here on Basic Brewing Radio. Well, that's all until next week. Until then, thanks for listening. I'm James Spencer. Production help for Basic Brewing Radio and our website is provided by our buddy in Austin, Kelly Dodson, who also designed our logo. Basic Brewing Radio is a production of Active Voicing. We'll talk to you next time. So long.